onto my channel's list today. I've got a 06 CRF450 and I'm going to be checking the valve clearances on this bike today. I'm going to take you along with me, show you how to do it. Shouldn't need to show you guys how to take your gas tank and seat off, but those would be the first steps in order to get access to the cylinder head here. We have to take this cover off and we're going to be working in here. Pretty straightforward with the twin spar. You get lots of room to work in here with the tank removed. Going to remove the spark plug cap. You don't need to take the plug out, but the cap has to come off. Oh, it's tight. Just push it off to the side, undo the breather here, and then these 3 bolts that hold the cover on. So with the head cover off, it exposes the cam wheel here, and we need to make sure the engine's at top dead center on the compression stroke when we're doing our measurements. So there's 2 tick marks on the cam wheel here. See, there's a line right here and a line right there. And then see this triangle right here on the cam holder? It's like cast into the cam holder. We've got to get this line to this arrow pointing it. And how do you tell which line to go for? Well, on the compression stroke, you don't want any of the camshaft lobes. As you can see right now, they're kind of pointed down this way. You don't want any of the lobes applying pressure on either the exhaust or the intake valves. You could tell from here the engine needs to be rolled forward. So you can use the Kickstarter to roll it over slowly. Should be right around there. So as you can see, the intake lobes are pointing back up towards us. The exhaust one's a little harder to see. It's kind of a more gradual lobe, but it's also pointed slightly backwards. So there's no pressure on the valves right now. Don't touch the Kickstarter. Don't let the engine rotate at all. There should be no pressure on any of the valves right now. The piston's at the top of the cylinder and it's in the firing position. Literally all we're doing in a valve clearance check is measuring the gap between, for the intakes on these Hondas, it's these lobes right here. There's 2. We're measuring the gap between the lobe and the valve bucket. And now it's really hard to see the bucket, but directly underneath each of these lobes, it's a bucket. It physically looks like an upside down bucket, and in those buckets there's a shim. And the shim is what actually pushes down on the valve. The bucket transfers to the shim in turn transfers the force to the stem and actually opens the valve. Now there's supposed to be a specific clearance in there between this lobe and the bucket, and shimming is what gets you that specific clearance. And on the exhaust side of things here for the Hondas, they have a rocker arm here. So there's a single exhaust lobe, that's this middle guy. And what we're doing is we're measuring, there's no bucket, but there's a shim right under there. We're measuring the gap between this rocker arm and the shim. I'll show you the clearances on the desk here. Make sure you check your owner's manual for your specific year and model bike, because this will be different over the years. Not drastically different, but just double check. So I pulled these off manual online for the 06 450R, and here they are here. Here's what we're shooting for. The intakes should be 6 thou plus or minus 1, and the exhaust should be 11 thou plus or minus 1. And here's their metric conversions there, 0.16 millimeter and 0.28, and both of them tolerance of plus or minus 0.03 millimeter. Here's where your feeler gauge set comes in. You can get these at pretty much any parts store, and make sure they go down small enough. Some don't, but usually they will. And then yeah, let's get to work. Let's try the exhausts first. So I'm starting with something big here, 17 I believe, and just outrageous number, and start working your way down or up, however you choose to do it. And it'll be pretty obvious for you when it goes in. Should notice too that I'm pushing down on the rocker arm there to gain that extra little bit of clearance, which does help. It's kind of essentially taking up the slack in the rocker arm, and you just keep working your way down until you find one that it should slip in relatively easy, and you'll know what it does. The exhausts are a little finicky because the shim itself moves a little bit on top, but it's just a trial and error thing and go for feel. So the right exhaust, I was able to get a really tight 13 in, but at 12 I felt a little sloppy. And it should be noted that right and left is as you're sitting on the bike. left exhaust, I got a pretty good feel on a 12 thou, so I'm gonna call it a 12. And same thing for the intakes. Start with something close, whether nominal or big or small. It's just a matter of feel. Trying to walk it in to this position can be a little tricky because you're kind of bending the feeler gauge to get it in, but you'll know when one goes through. You want it to slip all the way past, and you should see it poking out the other side, kind of underneath the lobes. Alright, so I wrote down what we got. I added an extra digit on the ones that I feel it's kind of in between, but she checks out good. The exhausts are a little big, but like I've said in my other videos, usually as the valve seats wear over time, your clearances get tighter, not looser. You can picture your poor little valve there slamming up against the seat thousands and thousands and thousands, like hundreds of times a second. It's going to wear out eventually, and the valve stem itself is going to slowly work its way up. So these clearances usually get tighter as time goes on, not looser. So if you leave them on the kind of the loose end to begin with, typically it'll last a little longer before you have to recheck it. Since my clearances are good here, I'm not going to go through the whole process. There'll have to be another video on how to adjust it. But I will show you the calculation here if you were needing to fix it. So we're trying to solve for A, so we need a new valve shim, and A represents its thickness, so you need to subtract. B is the recorded clearance that you measured, so let's just say you're too tight. Say on the intakes you were, I don't know, 0.002 or something, like very, very tight. So that's B. And then C is your specified valve clearance. So if we're shooting for on the intakes, it's 0.006. So 0.003 minus 0.006. And then once you got that number, you add D, which is the old shim thickness. Now you have to remove the cam holder. It's a whole process. Again, I'll have to show you in another video. You need to measure, you need to know what the original shim thickness that's in there is, because that is required to help determine the new one. But anyway, it's a pretty self-explanatory equation here. Really recommend you get a shim kit. It makes it easy. They use their all in millimeters. There should be 3 shims per size. Yeah, you can get them pretty inexpensive on Amazon too. I think there's some Chinese knockoffs. Not a bad thing to have if you're going to be running these 4-strokes. Sooner or later you will have to adjust your clearances. And some Torx here for you. Putting it all back together. I didn't touch the camshaft holder bolts. These are the camshaft holder bolts right here. There's 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I didn't touch any of those. You would though if you needed to adjust your clearances, because that all has to come off to get underneath it. But the cylinder head cover bolts, the ones that we did remove, the two long ones and the one short guy, you want to make sure you tighten these down properly, because as it so happens, I had to fix. Somebody had over torqued this guy here and the threads pulled out of it, so I had to put in a helicoil. It's a little less than ideal spot to do it. I don't like doing that, especially inside an engine. You have to be very, very, very careful with what you're doing. If any little bit falls off out of there, or even the insert comes out, then it's gonna cause major, major damage. So please just torque those properly. Don't over tighten them. Anyway, that's it. That's all quick and dirty. How to check them. Maybe someday we'll do a part 2 on how to adjust them. Cheers.